Good afternoon. Today is Thursday, April 14th. I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Thursday, I have friends who get together with me and talk about whatever is on their mind. Today is special because we'll do that, but also introduce to this program and to you a super friend and activist, organizer, executive in the community, Acooa Ellis. Acooa Ellis is the senior vice president for community impact at Greater Twin Cities United Way. Yesterday, she and the organization announced the awarding of $12.1 million in grants to about 90 organizations in Twin Cities, organizations committed to ending inequity and towards building an inclusive environment. I'm going to ask her to unpack and talk about that, say what it means. Let me begin, however, by disclosing that I work with Acooa. I am on the board and, in fact, vice chair of the board of Greater Twin Cities United Way. So I've been watching and supporting and participating in this work from the policy and oversight vantage point as well. My company, McFarlane Media, is a vendor, does business in placing advertisements in newspaper properties and radio properties that are part of the Minnesota Multicultural Media Consortium. So I wanted that to be on the table in the spirit of transparency. And having said that, welcome, Sister Acooa. How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be among this esteemed group of individuals.
Well, let me start by asking all of my colleagues, you might know them all, just to say who they are in less than 30 seconds, starting with Ndugu Yusef Mgeni. We haven't done it this way before, but this is a good way to try it. Yusef?
Let me unmute myself. Good afternoon. Cool, it's very nice to meet you. I've spent the past 50 years probably in more than 100 nonprofit organizational boards, working for at least a dozen nonprofit organizations here in the Twin Cities, and also served on National Committee for Responsive Philanthropy, the ABFI group, the Association of Black Foundation Executives. So I've had a lot of interaction with United Ways around the country and the National United Way, and it's very nice to meet you and learn about the new efforts of the Greater United Way of the Twin Cities.
Angela?
Hi, I'm Angela Rose, and I'm a Black woman in America, live in the Twin Cities, and a community member. That's 30 seconds.
Okay, Brenda, your turn.
After I swallow Canadian Dry. Okay, I'm Brenda Lyle Gray. I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I am a native Kansas Cityan. Grew up on 28th, just like my boss, Al McFarlane, and I've been writing for him for about 2 years. He gave me a shot, and I took off with it and very grateful. But we were in kindergarten together, so you're talking 70 years of friendship for sure. So very nice meeting you, and kudos to all of the work that the United Way has done. I remember the March of Dimes, and we would collect in the neighborhood. So it goes back. So congratulations. And to have a Black female there, bravo.
Jonathan, go ahead.
The Red Feather Organization.
Huh?
Don't forget the Red Feather Organization.
Yeah, I know.
The United Way.
Jonathan?
Well, and Acooa knows me, not just because we're one of those agencies that receive the funding, thank you, but just because we've worked together through a variety of community efforts overall my tenure here at Hallie Q. Brown, so 14 years. So great to see you. Everybody is saying the right thing. It is great to see her in the position of United Way, and the work that she is doing is something that is very necessary.
Jonathan, let me ask you to take 10 more seconds and talk about Hallie Q. Brown. It's an important foundational institution for our community. Take a second to tell people about that work.
Thank you. We're a 93-year-old African-American social service agency open to everybody. We work to provide social services and basic needs to families across the state of Minnesota. The pandemic had us expand our service area. So we went from just St. Paul to people in Elk River, Rochester, Lakeville, places like that. And the funding from United Way will help us continue that work, food out to people in the community, basic needs, and working hard to ensure the quality of life of people within Minnesota is high.
Great, thank you. Well, so Acooa, let me set you up here just with the paragraph after the story that's in Monday's upcoming edition of Insight News. The story reads, and it's a rewrite of the press release that the organization put out, but Greater Twin Cities United Way announced it is awarding $12.1 million to 90 nonprofits aligned with this vision of a community where all people thrive, regardless of income level, race, or place of residence. Funding will support people experiencing poverty and communities disproportionately impacted by poverty, including Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian American, Pacific Islander, and people of color. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Acooa. Tell us about the strategy, the intent, the objectives, and the processes. And all of us are going to be listeners and expect us to jump in when we want to if we need clarification. So it's a free conversation here. Acooa?
Well, first of all, thank you all for such a warm welcome. Al, thank you for your support today and the kind introduction, but also the support that you have lent my work and the insight that you had. Oh, see what I did there? The insight that you have contributed to our strategies over the 4 years that I've been at Greater Twin Cities United Way. I am deeply appreciative of that, and I don't think it can be overstated. I'll tell you a bit about the philosophy that drives my work before talking about the strategy, because the two are pretty aligned.
Please also tell us a little bit about yourself, Acooa.
Okay. All right. So I could borrow from Angela and say I'm a Black woman living in Minnesota, but to say a bit more, I've been in the Twin Cities region for just over 20 years and have had the opportunity to work in a number of spaces, which I think has been really helpful as I came to the role at Greater Twin Cities United Way, because it was an opportunity to bring all of those perspectives and that experience to bear in an organization that touches so many different stakeholder groups and kind of serves as a nexus in our community. So I started my career in direct service. Did work with families and children for a time, was a vocational counselor before that. And then that work is what led me to study policy and be really interested in better connecting legislation or laws with the direct and lived experience of folks who were maybe recipients of a particular program, because I was clear that the folks who were making the laws that were governing the lives of my students didn't know what it meant to live within those bounds. And so in wanting to support my students in advocating for themselves, I realized that I needed to better understand like the system, and then became really passionate about figuring out the best way to do that at scale, which is where I met Angela by way of her father, Dr. Myers, many moons ago, coming from swim practice. So I did that, studied policy, had a chance to work in Melvin Carter's office when he was city council member as his first aide. And that was where Jonathan and I got to partner most closely. And it's been great. And Yusef, I recall seeing you leading in some conversations that I was a part of in that role. Went from there to Target, doing supplier diversity, and then government affairs, where I represented the corporation in the southeast part of the country before moving to Catholic Charities, working in social justice advocacy, and then arriving at Greater Twin Cities United Way. So in a nutshell, you can see I've had the real privilege and honor of seeing multiple sides of the challenge, as you will, which gives me a real deep appreciation for yes and. And, you know, if any members of my team are watching this, they're probably rolling their eyes, because that is a very common phrase for me. I think there are many ways to get at a particular answer. And what I'm really excited about with this announcement that we made is a deep recognition that the folks that are closest to challenges are closest to solutions. And while we have a duty as an organization to invest our time, talent, and treasure, where we are likely to see the greatest benefit. It's important for us to do that in a way that positions us as learners and uses our platform to kind of share collectively what we're hearing and seeing with the community. Just a bit about Greater Twin Cities United Way. I will talk about the grants, I promise. Just a bit about Greater Twin Cities United Way and the Community Impact Department in particular. So a lot of people know about the grants that we offer. We're one of few lenders or funders, I should say, that offers multi-year operating support to organizations across the 9-county metro, and that's in service to our 3 impact areas, so household stability, educational success, and economic opportunity. And so people know about those, the larger grants, the longer term grants. What they may not know is that we also have a growing portfolio of what we call innovation grants or innovation initiatives, and there are grants associated with that. And the innovation initiatives are really in service to our long-term outcomes. So like all of the work is in service to those long-term outcomes I just mentioned. And they're designed to fill in gaps of either service delivery or connective tissue. So maybe, somebody might be doing a thing over here. Somebody else might be, sprinkling, trying to dabble over here, but maybe they don't know about each other's work and have the ability to partner together to co-create and build some proof points that we then can amplify, both to inform the field of practice, but also policy. And so that's one aspect of the work in the Community Impact Department. We also administer a 24/7 resource helpline known as 211. Some of you are probably familiar with the Rent Help Minnesota program that was administered through the Minnesota MHFA, Minnesota Housing and Finance Agency. Administered federal dollars around rental assistance, and 211 operators served as the front door to access those resources for folks across the state. We provide.
Is that funded through ARP, the COVID support?
Yes. So the first round came through the CARES Act dollars, and then the second round came from ARPA. Okay. And so, that's an example of additional work that is happening. We also administer or answer calls for about 70% of the state population for the Suicide Prevention Lifeline. So that's in partnership with the Department of Health and the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. In addition to that, there's an advocacy team that is within the Community Impact Department that's at the Capitol advocating for policies such as extending eligibility for Medicaid to avoid the benefits cliff that, disincentivizes folks from moving toward economic stability and wealth, honestly. And then our impact strategy and execution team that really is behind the scenes, making sure that and that is led by Stephanie Lewis, who I think would be a great guest in a future conversation, Al. That's led by the amazing Stephanie Lewis, and they are making sure that we're dotting I's, crossing T's, getting checks out as committed, and that we have a compelling impact story to share with the community. So that's Greater Twin Cities United Way's Community Impact Department overall. Now to talk a bit about the grants themselves. So the $12.1 million announcement that we made yesterday is an exciting one for me for multiple reasons. One, it demonstrates that we're transforming our model. We are responsive to how community is giving, as well as where we see needs currently and in the long term. And then it also represents, it presents an opportunity for us to share with the broader public the really nuanced way that we're thinking about investment in community. That $12.1 million is broken down into 3 kind of grant areas. The first is what folks know about. That's a $10.5 million invested in 89 organizations across the 9-county metro. Working in service to those 3 high-level impact areas that I described a moment ago. And $1.2 million invested in a new initiative that we're rolling out with this announcement called 80 by 3. And 80 by 3 is a nod to the neuroscience that tells us that 80% of a child's neural pathways are developed by the time they turn 3. The first time I heard that, I felt really sad because I'm sure my mom and dad didn't know that. I'm grateful that I did all right anyway. But I joke, but the reality is that each of us as individuals are likely to have an adverse childhood experience in our life. Um, Experiencing poverty is a particularly prolonged poverty is a pretty significant adverse childhood experience that without the right kind of environment, just by virtue of someone being broke or not having a lot of resources, that doesn't make their environment traumatic. But that exposure, absent a caring and nurturing environment, or like absent stability, has the opportunity or has the potential to manifest as trauma. And we know that, and there's a growing body of evidence to support the understanding that that trauma can manifest itself in the long term in ways that are really detrimental to a person's long-term stability and viability. So like executive functioning well into adulthood is an example. And so the 80 by 3 initiative in this round of grants is going to 9 different child care centers, early learning centers, to amplify what's working in each of those spaces, come up with a shared understanding of trauma-informed care, and then increase the capacity of those centers to offer healing-centered environments for children and their families. And all of this is in service to, one, providing stability and acknowledging and honoring the role of early childhood educators in our community, but also creating a space and greater environments where we're able to optimize brain development for our littlest learners. So that's 80 by 3. And then we also announced with this larger announcement, $400,000 that we're committing that will start in May to what we're calling purpose-driven paychecks. And that is a program that is part of our Career Academies initiative, where we've partnered with multiple school districts across the state. And the purpose-driven paychecks in particular are designed to support schools and employers partnering to drive really meaningful access to work for youth, particularly over the summer, but they'll have the ability to spend those dollars over the next year so that youth have a deeper ability to kind of imagine their future and direct their path according to their desired future. So I said a lot. I'll pause and I don't know if we should take questions. If you have questions.
Anybody have questions to begin with?
Yes, sir. I'd like to raise a few of them. Acooa, thank you very much for the information. I did read the insight information and also on the United Way website about the program. And my questions are more about the United Way because having worked in United Way agencies over the past 50 years, there have been times where the relationship was like a light switch. It was either all the way off or all the way on.
Yeah.
And there are agencies in the community today who have previously been funded by the United Way, which are now not funded.
Right.
There are also organizations who lost their funding and as a result have gone out of business. And the funding they lost was principally from the United Way. But let me ask a couple of questions, and I never learned how to be brief, so I'll talk fast. I'm pleased to learn that the United Way has grown more aware over the last 2 years that race and ethnicity sit at the intersection of the disparities in income, housing, education, and overall well-being. That's a direct quote from information about the grant program.
Yeah.
But I'm curious to know, however, exactly what United Way means and how it is they are investing more heavily in organizations with strong racial equity practices and responsive community-driven programming. Can you define that for us? Because
Absolutely.
we're not sure what you mean or how you determine that, because it says that's who the grants are focused on.
Absolutely. So you said a lot, Yusef. Let me, you pulled up the article. Let me start with the comment or the quote that you were reading, and I want to just provide a bit of clarification. So I would say that the Greater Twin Cities in the last couple of years has grown in their awareness. Greater Twin Cities United Way has not, and in fact, the last multi-year grant round that I oversaw had a very strong equity focus as well. So I think that's an important distinction to make. What I would say in terms of culturally specific organizations or responses, the way that we measured or evaluated. So let me back up.
No, that's exactly it. Yeah.
Yep, we approached this from a number of lenses. One, and the first kind of entry point was the application itself. And I want to just kind of walk you through how we scored the application, because that might give a bit of insight into that. But even before the application, I want to talk about the RFP. So when we pulled together the request for proposals, we did that in partnership with community leaders and folks with lived and professional experience. Some that were leaders of organizations that we were funding, some that were part of organizations that were no longer funding. So folks who are familiar with our work and familiar with the challenges in community. So they helped us develop the RFP. Within the RFP, the scoring rubric was, we weighted at 50% for the program. I'm reading it, so I make sure I don't misspeak.
No problem.
Went toward program and services approach and impact. So we wanted to know, what is it that you intend to do? What do you understand to be true about the population that you're serving? And we asked, who is your core constituency? So all of the organizations that show up in that $10.5 million, they have identified that the majority of the people that they're serving are non-white. And so then we wanted to know, that's kind of the price of entry, right? And then from that, it's what do you know to be true about those populations and their cultures, and how well does the work that you're intending to do align with what you know to be true about those populations? And so that was half of the application score.
Good.
The next was responsiveness to community. So can you describe a time, can you talk about the ways that you engage community and the people that you're serving have an opportunity to inform the services that are rendered? One aspect of that is like what we were looking for was a commitment to continuous improvement. So we're not interested in funding an organization that's like, this is what we do. We do it like this because we've always done it like this, and we may or may not listen. We might do a focus group, but I can't tell you whether or not we've changed our programs as a result of what we've heard. That would be an organization that wouldn't score as well in that space, right? So you can also assume that the organizations that move forward to the overall announcement that we made have a strong commitment to listening to, partnering with, and supporting individual identified and prioritized goals. So that's the second thing. And that was 30% of the score. The third was leadership representation. And this is, I chuckle because this one creates some heartburn for folks. And I think that's okay, right? I was telling John, who was with Al yesterday, this is what disruption feels like. It's not comfortable, right? So when we talk about leadership representation, we're talking about folks who are director staff. So not just board of directors, staff. So not board of directors, I should say. Staff at director level and above. So folks who are driving strategy, who are dictating how a particular service or set of services get rendered. What is the extent to which those folks identify with the people that you're serving? And that's, it's not a large percentage, but for organizations that didn't, there's a strong correlation between that leadership representation and then program services and such, right? So it wasn't an automatic, we have some organizations that are part of the slate that are large legacy white-led organizations, or largely white-led organizations that still got funded because they could articulate a very strong vision and a history of impact, particularly for people of color. So that's the other piece. And then last but not least was 5% for financial impact. And that 5% doesn't mean that finances weren't important. It meant that the cost of admission was to be in good standing financially. You made a point, Yusef, around folks going out of business after they lose their United Way funding. That is a part of our organization's history that I'm particularly sensitive to. In the last multi-year cycle and this current one, we limited or capped the amount of money that an organization, we lowered the threshold whereby an organization could be eligible for Greater Twin Cities United Way dollars in the last multi-year cycle. So you used to have a $1 million budget. We lowered that to $250,000, right? So we wanted to make sure we're walking our talk. and take the lessons that we learned from the smaller program that we had going, which Jonathan was a member of, and that was the Culturally Empowered Communities program that was specifically focused on building the capacity for culturally specific organizations. So we took that insight, folded it into our multi-year RFP, and we have capped the max that an organization can qualify for or be granted at 20% of their organization's budget. So we want to make sure that we're not so much a part of an organization's well-being that a decision that happens that may or may not be within our control puts them at risk. But we also know the first side of that is, particularly for our smaller
nonprofits.
Yep, smaller nonprofits, but those that are culturally specific is the word I was looking for. Having access to and being a part of the Greater Twin Cities United Way funded organizations lends a credibility that allows them to access additional dollars outside of ours. So I just want to represent like the full picture. I hear what you're saying. I acknowledge and honor that that's a part of the organization's history, and want you to know that that's something that we absolutely considered as we pull together our grant making strategy.
Yeah, well, we're very proud that Al McFarlane is the vice president of the board, because Al is respected throughout the state of Minnesota, not just in Minneapolis or in the Twin Cities, and that's very reassuring for us. I'm reminded of a story about the Ford Foundation, because they were bemoaning the fact that there were very few people of color or women either in the governance structure or leadership and staff positions. And they put a question in the grant application. And I thought of this when you talked about how you rated the applications. And the question said, how many people of color and women are on your board or are staff members at the support and leadership level in your organization? It had absolutely no bearing on whether or not the organization got a grant. But from one year to the next, for repeat applicants, there was a massive increase in the number of people of color and women who had joined the board of those organizations applying for funds, and in the staff, both at the support, worker bee and leadership level within those organizations. So even raising the questions, you said some people were disjointed or uncomfortable. Even raising the question is important, because it forces the leadership in those organizations to consider it and hopefully act on it. And they thought that perhaps it might have some bearing on whether or not they received the funding.
Absolutely.
But the people were in place and could defend themselves and be accountable. The other piece that's important, in addition to Al McFarlane being a vice president, is Hallie Q. Brown, Ujamaa Place, Model Cities, the Neighborhood House, Merrick, Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid on the East Metro, Harriet Tubman, Summit Academy OIC, Sabathani, Pillsbury, Project for Pride and Living, Phyllis Wheatley, North Point, are organizations that among those who are listed as receiving grants as part of this project. And these are legacy organizations, heritage organizations within our community that communities have been working with and have respected across generations. They're not just Johnny-come-latelys who opened, mom and pop platforms. The other reality is constituency governance, because much of the funding that comes from corporate and foundation giving programs that comes into our communities goes to people who don't represent our community. Their boards are not constituency governed. Their organizational leadership is not constituency representative. And we're very curious about how they can impose their definition of our needs on us without us being at the table to help develop the recipe. So constituency governance is another critical ingredient, and it tends to occur more in the legacy heritage organizations or in the culturally specific startups, because they're more reflective of their intended beneficiaries than it does in some of the long-standing academic and high impact research organizations. And I want to ask this question, and then I want to shut up so other people can participate in the dialogue, and I appreciate your candor. Does the fact that this award program has been announced serve as an acknowledgement that the United Way must do more in these areas in terms of this intersection between race and poverty and housing and food and other, educational, sustainable support? Does this mean we can expect more grant making in this direction to come from the United Way, or is this a one-off where you've got a good grant program and it gets a big splash in the media and then it's back to some kind of business as usual? Help me with that.
Yep. So what I'll say is that the last multi-year cycle that we did had a very strong equity focus. And that was in service to the organization's long range plan. So some of, like, I don't want to act like, excuse me, I'm the first person to think about equity and try to figure out a way to incorporate that into our funding at Greater Twin Cities United Way. It was a part of the long range plan and a commitment toward creating or supporting holistic solutions within the broader nonprofit ecosystem when I arrived. My job was to bring it to life. So we did that in a very meaningful way 3 years ago and went even deeper this go around. So I don't know if does that speak to your
question? It does. And I want to give you a word of advice. I said I was going to shut up. The challenges that we face here in the Twin Cities, in the metro area, are so much more manageable than they are in Chicago or East St. Louis or Detroit or Indianapolis or any other comparable urban area. Of the 25 largest urban areas in the United States, we have the highest percentage of people of color in poverty. So go back and tell your funders, tell your corporate partners, tell your board of directors that these challenges are so much more manageable if we commit to seriously and meaningfully addressing them. And I think if we do that intentionally and we do it with sufficient resources, we're not talking about a lifetime to address that situation. We could take a gulp out of these issues. You talked about collaboration among different organizations. There are enough challenges for every nonprofit that United Way serves to get a 747 and fill it up with constituents. There's no need for unnecessary duplication or competition. But because these challenges are so much more manageable, if we have the political and the financial will, we can address them so much more effectively. But thank you for your candor and for responding to my questions.
What I love about this conversation is a framing of what we're looking at the Humphrey and my courses around the nonprofit industrial complex, right? And these, even Acooa, you're giving very actionable steps for organizations to take. And Yusef, you are giving very much a wake-up call to whoever is, watching on here as to some of the needs to combat that complex. Even in your framing of your initial question around, is this a one-off? And then also, sometimes funding is the only source for some of these smaller organizations, and they even have to shift their goals or even their mission to fit their funding source. And so at what point then is the change that we want to see in our community being driven by the constituents, by the people who are in that community versus by what the funders want to see? And so I really love this conversation and the back and forth, because we are seeing actionable steps that Greater Twin Cities United Way is taking, and then also the dream and the visions and the questions that we all should be asking to these larger funders as well. So I just wanted to frame up that conversation. That's a very important conversation that's being had at the Humphrey and being had across the country.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And
Angela, yeah, we know that we hold you as our resident youth expert, bringing fresh lens, fresh eyes, and ideas, and a powerful and clear voice and analysis to our community and society. So I wanted you to just think about how young people and how the future will assess and direct the notion of engagement, philanthropy being one part of that, how will it shape or redirect or redefine what philanthropy is? The relationship between the resourced and the communities, which in and of themselves have great assets that simply, in my view, need support, development, nurturing, and equity. So what are your thoughts? And I'm asking you to speak from your activist lens and your youth lens.
Yeah, no, I've seen a number of things of organizations that youth have started. I'm thinking particularly of one called Minnesota Teen Activists, which just filed as 501c4, right? And it's a group of, 16, 17, 18-year-olds that are filing their 501c4s, right? That's something that's daunting for adults to do, and they are taking that upon themselves. But we saw during the uprising after the murder of George Floyd, a number of youth trying to organize and asking for mutual funds, mutual aid to fund their initiatives through social media, things like that. And it's interesting. It's an interesting model, particularly in this age of social media and this age of like Cash App. And so it was something that I found that was interesting. But those organizations and those youth, particularly as they're facing burnout, and there's also, some of these youth organizations, I'm thinking of one particularly that was in their mission, they said that their focus and their staff was going to be under 30. And so then as their staff aged, the practical issues of that. So, there's a lot of youth, there's a lot of young people, there's a lot of people in my cohort who are dealing with learning right now the actual difficulties of, creating an organization, of leading an organization. When I was at the NAACP, right, just to be very honest, as the president of the Minneapolis branch, I had to take a number of NAACP trainings on getting our finances and what does that look like for grants and the types of things that we need to look at. And so it's difficult and there's a learning curve. But one of the things I'm happy about, right, I took a nonprofit management course at the U, right? And so there is a group of folk who have learned this work, right, through going to their master's degree program, going through an MBA program, something like that. And then there's a group of folk who've learned it in the street through the mud, right? And it's so incredibly amazing to see so many youth who are very, okay, these are the questions that we need to ask. We need to stay on top of these finances. We need to stay on top of these things because they don't want to end up, making a decision that might cost them not just their livelihood, but a decision that might cost them their reputation or even, their opportunities to go to college, which is crazy to me. Like you're making financial decisions in high school that might impact you for going to college for an organization, but you live and you learn. And I think also this comes into recently in the news, they were talking about when you're getting all these funds from individuals and you're getting individual donations into your organization and you get a very large, amount of funds. How do you steward? What does good stewardship look like? And that was a question that for the Black Lives Matter organization, they have bought that $6 million house to be their campus in California, which was a decision that they had made to buy this house was to be a safe house on some days, for activists who might need protection, but then also to create content for like their Instagram and social media. And, that is a question where the folks who donated to them, right there, and then also the folks that are on the ground in the different cities that they have chapters in, ask, is that good stewardship of these funds? And that's also a question when you're talking about this individual donation model that you have to continue to ask. When you have a funder, a major funder, where you're getting a large portion of your funds from one funder or a couple of funders, it's clear in the contract, how you're supposed to use those funds, right? But when you're getting a lot of individual donations, the question becomes, what does good stewardship look like? So the Minneapolis NAACP, right after the murder of George Floyd, we went from $5,000 in our bank account to over $100,000 in our bank account. And this is all public information because we say it at every meeting, at every Minneapolis NAACP meeting. We say the funds in our bank account, and the members can always ask our treasurer to show them the funds, because that is a part of the NAACP's transparency and accountability. That is part of what it means to be compliant in the NAACP as a branch. But that is, also one of those things where Black Visions Collective or Black Lives Matter, they seem to not have that same transparency instilled into their bylaws. And that's a good question. That is a valid question to ask and to want to see in an organization. But then when you're on the other side in the executive leadership of an organization, you have to think about, okay, whose funds are these really? And when I was president of Minneapolis branch, I felt like these funds are the community's funds. The people weren't just donating to the NAACP for the NAACP, but for what's happening in Minneapolis. So we need to make sure that these funds are really injected into Minneapolis community members, particularly Black Minneapolis community members. So, that was a decision made. And because we have members, because we could vote on it, because we had, we have checks and balances that way, the accountability measures were there. But for other organizations who do get a large amount of funds through individual donations, they're still trying to figure that out. And that's a good question in nonprofit management, is how are you a good steward of individual funds, and how are you accountable to the funds and to the people who have donated, and how are you transparent as well? Because, there's people who are donating to Black Lives Matter Global Foundation who are, in Paris, who are in Tokyo, who are in Los Angeles, who are in Minneapolis, and who are in Ferguson. And, maybe how you're transparent and accountable to them might look different, and what you are doing. And it maybe doesn't look like buying a $6 million house in LA, but if it is, you have to justify it, and you have to be transparent about it.
Let me ask Acooa to weigh in. That's a lot, Angela. Thank you so much for bringing that expansive set of ideas. But how does that weigh into the calculus, the concerns that are global and local? How does it weigh into the calculus of how we operate? I asked yesterday, John Wilgers was on the program talking about the grants and about the organization. And I asked him to explain this notion of disrupting racial inequity, both in the outward facing work and strategy, but also internally within the organization. And maybe you can address some of the concerns about organizations in general that Angela Rose Myers raised in how the United Way addresses those. And I want Jonathan to weigh in after that, because Jonathan, you are a legacy institution organization at Hallie Q. Brown, and respond to, again, the same concerns or questions, and maybe you have questions of Acooa as well. Brenda, same with you as our reporter columnist. So first, let me go back to Acooa.
So I appreciate the question, Al. I think, and thank you, Angela, for that perspective. I'm super excited to know that there's growing access to tools, resources, and training to ensure strong accounting, financial practices, and transparent operations. I think that's super, super important. Al, your question, I think, bridges a point that Yusef made earlier in Angela's contributions. And I will say, I think it's incredibly important that we are as transparent as possible, that we're investing where, the stakeholders, as we identify them, are invested. And the extent to which we're able to do that is dependent upon the broader community's kind of acceptance or desire to contribute. So Greater Twin Cities United Way is not a traditional funder or philanthropy. We're an intermediary, meaning we raise dollars one year and get them out the door the next. So we're subject to the same kind of financial wins of any other nonprofit that's fundraising. And I tell people, this is the greatest faith journey I've ever been on professionally, because we are absolutely making multi-year commitments to organizations for work that we think is important and meaningful, and raising the dollars to support that on a yearly basis, right? So like, there's faith in our community's ability and willingness to contribute and join us in that journey. So to your question, Yusuf, around whether or not this is a fly-by-night or long-standing, I'll tell you that there are aspects of what I have advanced as the leader of this department that are scary, because it is disruptive. And like, I got to be able to sleep at night. I got to be able to like who I see reflected back in the mirror. And so these are the calls that I make. But there's a part of me that is like, is the community with me? Like, the community writ large. And, you know, the biggest way to demonstrate that is by contributions. And so, you know, if we don't have it to give, I tell the team, like, you can be woke all day. If we don't have dollars to give, what of it, right? So there's a line that has to be walked so that we are responsive and leaders. And it's always yes and. That we are both informing our constituencies. So there's not I sit at a lot of tables. I assure you, there's not a person that has sat in a room with me that would attest to me not bringing up these issues and helping people understand like what it really is out here. And I've got a duty to sustain our ability to continue to contribute to organizations that are doing really meaningful work. And so it is like, that is all art. No science to it, but you know, I think you raised some really strong points, Angela. And you know, this is a faith journey. It's also a partnership. I mentioned in the video that accompanied our announcement that, you know, these set of decisions is reflective of an assumption that our community also is tired of talking, tired of flowery statements, and ready to like buckle up and do what's necessary to move beyond. Like the status quo. Al, to put a finer point on your question, there have been moments internally where we've heard from donors, for example, or from partners who feel like we've gone too far, who feel like, you know, maybe this isn't the move, and that creates some anxiety, and and we're like, we're gonna do a thing. Like, again, faith journey. We have faith that our community will step up and do what is necessary for us to continue to advance this work, and that, you know, somebody's got to go first, or somebody's got to go deep to demonstrate that it's not actually as scary as it may feel. So I guess I have a lot of thoughts. I'm trying to be respectful of the fact we've got 9 more minutes left for 2 people that haven't talked. So I hope I answered your question out, even if in a roundabout way.
Absolutely. Jonathan, jump in.
Well, my perspective tends to be a little bit unique because I was a funder before coming to Hallie K. Brown. So I understand what it's like to be in that position. One of the things that I really appreciate about United Way, and I think is kind of unique, and it also explains why sometimes people have frustration, is that United Way is the only funder that actually has conversations with their grantees about the grants. And you can get feedback from any foundation, but United Way actually had talked with us about this equity focus, brought together the CEOs of organizations, legacy organizations, and talked about this whole opportunity and what they were looking to do. So I see a difference in how United Way operates. I don't necessarily agree with everything they do. You know, we don't always get all the funding that we apply for, but we also have a long-standing relationship. United Way was our first funder back in 1929, and so we've had a relationship since that time. And one of the things that's really key right now is doing this deep dive of going ahead. We're coming out of the pandemic, I hope. But, you know, a lot of organizations, United Way and other foundations, jumped in to help organizations during that. But now the focus does need to be on that equity lens. It does need to be on racial issues and systemic racism and how deeply that is interwoven into our society. Just came out with the video today of the young man in Michigan that was shot in the head by
Grand Rapids.
police officers. And you look at here, it was Dante Wright was killed in the middle of the trial for George Floyd's murder. So you have this whole thing of racism is here. It has been here. It is a huge part of American society, and we have to address it if we are ever going to realize what the American dream actually is. If we're going to be able to advance equity, if we're going to be able to make it so that we eliminate poverty, we have to address this big piece that often gets overlooked or gaslit or pushed to the side. And I have seen a real difference since Acooa has been there in how United Way has been focusing on that. John Wilgers is great. I've enjoyed working with him, but Acooa has brought a unique lens to that to ensure that this is a top priority. And that's the thing that we need to continue. The rest of the foundation community needs to hop on that same bandwagon, and some of them are, but that's where our focus needs to go, because it will eliminate all the other issues that fall under this.
Brenda, quick comment before we start wrapping it up. You're muted still. You're muted.
Angela touched on what I wanted to say about Black Lives Matter. Really concerned about their direction and what comes next. So that was good. And I hope as part of the program, Acooa, as far as youth, I'm a former educator and really concerned about what programming is going, not just in Minneapolis, but across the country, as to how we're going to support our children who are so far behind now. And we have to use those summer months.
We're coming to the end. Acooa, I'm going to have you make some final statements here, if you wish. Either, I always, the time goes so quickly. Thanks, Yusef, for asking Acooa to talk about herself. And I would typically want to spend more time talking about you, your vision, your passion, your lineage. What is it that pours into the Acooa Ellis that we're addressing right now, and what is it that will remain as part of the world that we are creating by every step we take. So give me some summation words. And I'm going to ask you, what are you reading right now? How are you keeping yourself balanced, informed? Tell us what you're into at the moment. Acooa?
I'm reading Twitter and Simon B. Rhymer with my son. We spend a lot of time. Al, one of the things that came up as I was listening to you a second ago that it's important to me to share is, the belief and the philosophy that each and every person is born with the capacity to be great in some regard. And some people are super fortunate and find ways to be great in multiple regards. But I've seen in family, friends, folks who don't have access to resources, don't have the investment, don't have the benefit of a loving, supportive environment around them. And it over time dims their light. And what I'm after is removing as many barriers to that greatness as possible. And in fact, building bridges to actualize that possibility. And that is what I've been fortunate to be able to do at Greater Twin Cities United Way and in roles prior to today. And that's what excites me and helps me move past what might be, a particularly scary step in service to, in belief of the potential of our community and what's necessary in order to actualize that.
Awesome. Jonathan, what are you reading right now?
Well, on Al's recommendation, this just came in the mail today. So I am opening this one up. This is my new one that I'm getting ready to start today. So I'm looking forward to that all the way through.
Yusef, I know you got something to share.
I'm still reading Warrior Cop, The Militarization of Local Law Enforcement Agencies. And St. Paul NAACP does a lot of work with law enforcement community. We're in the state capitol, so we spend a great deal of time lobbying and testifying in the state legislature on these issues. And we have an outstanding relationship with the St. Paul Police Department. The NAACP and the St. Paul Police Department have had a written agreement going back to 2001 when Corky Finney was the chief, that was mediated by the Justice Department because we were concerned about racial profiling. And we're now working on an addendum to that agreement because we got body cameras, we got all this military equipment coming in. And so we spend a lot of time dealing with issues that have an impact with mutual benefit for both law enforcement and for communities of color. So doing a lot of reading, the no-knock policy, legislation stuff, the whole 9 yards. Yeah.
I'll ask Acooa to help us bring a program back that talks about the Justice Reform Initiative at Greater Twin Cities United Way. Brenda, what are you reading? Anything new?
No, I'm writing.
You're writing. That's right.
I'm
Well,
writing.
let me share two things I'm reading. I just got this one yesterday, and it's a book, Barracoon, and it's writing of Zora Neale Hurston, her
Yes, sir.
interviews with one of the slaves, the enslaved Africans who was brought here in the last ship to come into the country, the Clotilde, I think, in the area of Mobile. I'm also reading, this is a fascinating piece. This is actually one of Batala's books. I found it in her library downstairs, but it's been there for 20 years. And it's the incidents in the life of a slave girl, historical narrative describing the horrors of slavery as experienced by Black women, by Linda Brent, not her real name, but a true recording of her experiences, the challenges of her plan to get to freedom, which she did. But all of it ties into where we are now, the historical memory, the legacy, the consequence of that. And what we're doing, I believe, together is undoing and repairing and seeking the restoration, the remembrance of the brilliance, the greatness, the solidity of our people, of our culture, and of our place in the world, both historically and in our responsibility to the future. I want to thank all of you. Special thanks to you, Acooa Ellis, for your leadership role at Greater Twin Cities United Way. And hopefully we can keep bringing partner organizations like Hallie Q. Brown and others to talk about their mission, their vision, and how we collaborate together to create community. I'm Al McFarlane. We'll see you all next time. Take care.
So nice meeting you.
Nice to meet you as well. Thanks for having me.